Hello, I am the cartoonist M. Rashid. Today's cartoon was inspired by um several comments under my recent videos where I mentioned or referenced religion and God and stuff, and the these comments were very negative and hostile, and saying like, "There's no God, you idiot," and calling me the N word and stuff like that. Uh, but it also reminded me of several threads in how they were sounding and in the context, and why they would say such things. Like there's a bunch of stuff that are touching when they do that, especially to me. I'm like, I don't, I know there's some people who still are influenced by the godless communism thing that latched itself onto the Black liberation movements. So when they see uh, me say those things or see the religious cartoons that are peppered through my backlist, they might strongly disagree that I'm even putting the ADOS advocacy in that frame. But you know, I briefly struggled at the beginning of whether I would do that. You know, briefly struggled with it. Like maybe I shouldn't conflate the two, and I should separate. But the reason why I end up not doing it is because realistically, the work that legitimate anti-racism activists perform is God's work. That's God's work. You can't separate the language of God and God's message and the mission for the believers and all that's around that in sacred scripture from the mission of what the true, dedicated, sincere activist is working to achieve for the Black American former slave class. You can't separate those. There's a reason why the Black church was driving first abolition and then the civil rights movement. That those were not coincidence. It was conflicting the slave owners in their religion specifically that created the national conflict about um, chattel slavery in the land of the free. There was the conflict from the religious side specifically that made that a national discussion. If they were godless and didn't care, it wouldn't have been an issue, which is what they're working to achieve in the modern day. They're trying to separate you from religion so that they can do all the same stuff they've always done without that conflict. They're human beings, though, so they have that void in their soul from trying to distance themselves from what's right. So, in order to fill that void, noticeably, they step over the religions that have that day of judgment accountability built into them and go after like the far eastern religions that might you remember the remember judo was created by taking cherry picking a piece out of jujitsu, and now you just have this little piece to work with. Now that's judo. Some of those far eastern religions function the same. Well, they cherry pick out of God's religion this little piece, conspicuously missing the accountability part. And whites are like, "Oh, that's the part I like. Now I'm spiritual. I'm not accountable. It's like whatever I like and whatever. That's your version of spiritual." I did a cartoon about that a year ago or so. I played around with that concept. But, you're transparent, you're nonsense. You don't get to uh, completely avoid what God said about selfishness and the love of money and all of that and what that means You don't get to bow down to mammon and pretend you're spiritual. That's not how it works. You play a lot of games. Don't be have the nerve to be offended when I refer to you as the fiend when you walk that way. Anyway, back to my cartoon. The attitude of these people, calling me names and stuff, or like I unashamedly submit my will to the Most High with no issue. So the fact that you, of all people, are going to show up and make fun of me and call me an idiot and suggest that I'm of lesser intelligence because I believe you. Oh, yeah, okay. All right, so several threads were touched when they do this stuff to me. I bounce all over the place about it. One of the things it reminds me of is like in my late father's book wish list that I inherited from him. He happened to give it to me like maybe a year before he passed, and before I discovered the internet, really. So I'm like, wow, look at this. So I'm like, sort of looking for his books in all those bookstores and back home before I left Michigan, and but once I discovered the internet and saw how easy it was to hunt down all these rare books and stuff, it was a piece of cake. But he was gone by the time I look, Dad, But one of them was one of my favorites, one of my own personal favorites. It was called "The Four Mystic Rebels" by Harry C. Schnur, and it was, basically it's like a historical biography over these four historical figures. It was really, the writer Schnur was thorough and good in that old school way. Those writers were verbose and wordy, the way my ideological foes in the modern day hate, apparently, or maybe they only hate it when I do it. But it's not lost on me that y'all are big fans of, a lot of y'all are fans of Jack Vance, and he was all about that life. You never say, he's too wordy for me, but you like that when I do it. So, do you think I not noticed that a huge portion of racism is hypocrisy? Like blatant, in your face, not even trying to hide it, hypocrisy, and I'm not supposed to notice? You have a lot of nerve in a lot of ways. You're transparent in your nonsense. And you do that at every point, at every single point you stand. It's nonsense. So you're gonna stand there and act like I'm the highly evolved human, the smartest creature on earth. Your version of being smart is the functional equivalent of catching people off guard with 3-card Monte. That's your version of intelligence. And it goes no further than that. So you can keep trying me. You can keep, saying the same stuff you say to everybody. But I see straight through you. When you talk, when you write, when you post, I see straight through you. Because you're confident, overconfident in your arrogance, and you're sloppy. And I see the trail of your nonsense following behind you, going back 5 centuries. You haven't scrubbed the record enough to walk the way you walk. I posted those comments from before you started actively whitewashing history, when your people were a lot more honest, humbly honest about where you get your lore from, where you've inherited your stuff from and built up on. That stuff is still in the record. It's still there. I posted it and you conspicuously ignored it. So you can keep acting the way you act. I am the most highly evolved human. I am the semi-divine son of white Jesus. Bow down to me. Keep acting that way. I see straight through you. And it's fun to cartoon you when you acting all sloppy with your slip showing. Please continue. Anyway, the Schnur in the Four Mystic Rebels, one of the I think it was Shabbatai Zevi in that particular, in the introduction sketch, as he's like explaining who Zevi was. I think that was the one, or Cagliostro. One of the two. In the beginning, he was like in fleshing out the time period that this particular figure walked in and who they were. He happened to mention what life was like for the atheists before Charles Darwin showed up. He said in those days, being intelligent and being educated and stuff, it came with the package of being a believer. Like, that was just part of the package. If you were intelligent, well-read, and educated, you believed. You were a man of the book. You were a man or woman of the enduring scripture of the ages. You understood it. You knew it. You could quote scripture. You were about that life. So he mentioned that for the atheists, for the people who, for whatever reason, just couldn't get there, they kept that to themselves. So in a land in which, in order to be educated and intelligent, you had to believe as a given. If you did not believe, you shut the hell up. It was it's possible that the quote of it's better to remain silent and be thought a fool than to open your mouth and remove all doubt. It's possible that came specifically talking about the atheist figure in that time period. If you had doubts, you did not voice those doubts. You shut up. And then Darwin showed up, and then they like, oh my gosh, this is it. Now we can pretend that, like, the world just sprang magically through a mystical version of science, or that we invented, where science does it. It's science its way into existence. All right, okay, because that's the level of intelligence the atheist works around. It's like continuously taking L's, but he thinks he's like, now I'm the intelligent one. Within it, So what am I supposed to do with that? So that was funny to me. So when these characters are like, there is no God, you idiot, N-word. Look, Blackie, you're an idiot. There is no God. There's no spirit. Look at you. I'm looking at you. Whatever you're trying to project on me and trying to influence me with, it doesn't. No, that's not a thing. You remember in the 20th century, the most celebrated scientists of the 20th century, the Manhattan Project guys, the guys, Einstein, Feynman, like those guys, they assumed in their atheism that the universe always existed, that it didn't have a beginning. They assumed this for no other reason than because the sacred scripture said the universe had a beginning. So they were like, okay, obviously that's nonsense fiction. So obviously it didn't have a beginning because the Bible said it did. And they, were very arrogantly like proclaiming their atheism with no issue. Like, it's just a given. It's just a matter of time before we're done with the crutch of God nonsense. especially Feynman. He was all about that life. He was, come on, God. So when facts revealed the expanding universe and the implications that originally formed Big Bang Theory, revealed that the Bible, sacred scripture, told you up front what was true. And as you learn more, you realize that you're just confirming what the Bible said up front was true. God said, I invented the universe from scratch at a particular point. The facts that science measured revealed the universe had a particular point in which it sprang into existence. The Bible told you up front what was real, and in your science, you're catching up to what was already expressed as true. That's religion 1, atheism 0. The atheists just assumed that there was no great deluge, that the great flood of legend, the great flood of Noah, was a fiction for no other reason than because the Bible said it was true. It's obvious nonsense because the Bible said it, so it can't be, it's not real. Until some scientists with integrity, high-level scientists from around the globe, came together and discovered that the smoking gun event of the Younger Dryas, near extinction level event of like 12,800 years ago, where after the Ice Age, maybe it was a couple of centuries after the Ice Age or something like that, a couple of centuries, the Earth is starting to warm down, a time of plenty, like those glaciers are melting, the Earth is absorbing it, the heat, the Earth is heating up. As the Earth absorbs that water from the glaciers, it like creates this super flora and the megafauna that feeds upon it, and then the megafauna that feeds upon them. And it was a time of plenty for everybody, including, us. And then suddenly, the record shows that the temperatures plunge right back to the way they were at the height of the Ice Age for 1,300 years. This was the Younger Dryas. And then it started to warm up again and stuff. But for that intense 1,300 years in the record, they're like, what the heck happened right there? Everything was fine. The Ice Age was over, and then things were starting to warm up again into this wonderful time of plenty. And then suddenly it was back to the Ice Age for 1,300 years, and then it recovered again. But what happened during that time? It was a mystery. The scientists from around the world working together from their different, intensity, discovered that it was a comet. A comet that the ancient Egyptians referred to as the Phoenix Comet. When it showed up, the comet came into our atmosphere, broke up, and then hit those ice sheets in North America, like as it landed. That's why there's no craters where it landed in North America, up near, where Upper America, Canada is right there. Some of them hit the Atlantic, and I think some of them might have hit in Europe over there, but they found the craters in the Atlantic from the satellite. There's going to be no craters when it hit those ice sheets. Those ice sheets were gigantic. They were like 2 miles high or whatever. So, but the cultural memory of the people, this was a big deal. When the comet hit, it messed the world up. That 1,300 years of taking us right back to the worst temperatures of the Ice Age, that was nuclear winter of a comet smashing into us from splam. So the cultural memory of the people of the globe, the surviving Native American tribes, who, you know, a lot of them were completely wiped out. There were a lot of people in North America completely wiped out, to the point that we today assume that North America didn't have much of a population, but this turned out not to be true. There were a lot of people and civilizations and stuff going on in North America when that happened. The surviving Native Americans remember, when they tell the tale, they remember a figure from among their ancestors who received some mysterious visions of the coming of this great disaster. And it was moved to gather two of every animal and everything that was most precious to them and hide it somewhere in some way. And around the world, most famously Noah, and second most famously Gilgamesh, but everybody had a figure like that around the world. In the Turkey area, their figure, he was told that there was a great cold coming or something like that, and he had to like gather two of whatever and two in like the grains and stuff he needed and bury it. That's what their Noah figure did. But everybody had a figure like that. So Noah wasn't just one guy. He was real, but he also represented an archetype of a figure of prophets who had the exact same mission as he during that 1300 years, or maybe leading right up to that 1300 years, because there was a lot going on in that 1300 years. There wasn't just one super smashing event. Like, it was significant enough to cause a ripple of several events during that time, even in the immediate aftermath. Remember, that's like 2 miles of ice, enough to stop that super comet that created a nuclear winter. So the Native Americans remember, we were minding our own business, and then suddenly you hear this rumble and you see this gigantic wall of green water coming at you, smashing everything in its path. That's what they remember, the leftover from that event, wrecking North America. Some of the evidence of the time is these, like, I forgot the actual name, but there's these microscopic round fused glass pieces that only happen during a nuclear event that's found in the strata from that time period, you know. And they were like, here's the comet's evidence. And then in the Atlantic, we found one of the fragment craters from that time period, you know. It's fascinating. But this was the smoking gun of the Great Flood of legend. So the oldest civilizations among us, they're survivors, they're descendants in whatever way. They track their beginnings from after that. They have some cultural memories of what it was like before that great event, when they were like, had high civilization and were doing all this great stuff. And then in their arrogance, they say they were smashed for it, because that figure, their Noah figure, also warned them of the coming of a terrible day and to get their stuff in order. The same message Noah gave. People were tripping around the world in that time period. People didn't want to listen, of course. And the Noah figure, like, okay, it's coming. I'm trying to tell you, listen, get their stuff and put it on their version of the ark. Smash! Trying to tell you. But the important part of me explaining this is religion 2, atheism 0. And you have no answer for it. Everything you assumed in your small-minded mentality turned out not to be the case. Which is not surprising, because the one God said it. Therefore, it was true. And who are you to say otherwise? Coming into my comments, calling me names and stuff, when you don't know anything. As an atheist, you don't believe in anything, right? Right? Therefore, you proudly stand on nothing at all while you hold on to this arrogance that you carry. Your arrogance based on literally nothing. Proudly. You don't believe in anything. You don't believe in anything that backs your mindset, your position. As an atheist, literally nothing. I am the theist. I am the believer in the one God of Abraham, the master of the day of judgment. I believe in the revealed scripture of the ages, the same scriptures that entire human civilizations was built upon. So clearly, whether you believe in it or not, it's still a real thing, is it not? The history of sacred scripture on earth is still a thing that can be tracked by human historians using science and archaeology and stuff. That's still a real thing. You don't believe in its contents, but the sacred scripture of the ages is still a real thing. It's still a real thing in real life, in reality. So you can't say, I don't believe in what I believe in is nothing. It's real. Literally, entire human civilizations was built upon the source text of my belief system versus your literal proud nothing. So, please don't come in my comments calling me names for believing in something that's actually real while you proudly stand on nothing in your foolishness. Go on about your business and be the proud, unrepentant hellbound as you like. We'll find out in the end who is correct and who is not. But, my money's on that side. Have fun. Thanks and peace.